Are you a physician who wants more autonomy in how you practice or fulfillment in your life? If so, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Change Physician podcast, where you can learn the mindset, skills, and strategies to create the life you want without selling out your morals and values. I'm your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and I'm joined today with my co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady.
Cady. I'm a Cady now.
Melissa Cady.
You sound like you're from the South where I am.
Oh, yeah, I should be from the South. I am definitely not from the South, but and today we're going to talk about workaholism, which is a difficult word for me to say.
Yeah.
But I think you have some
harder to live.
Harder to live. So, Dr. Cady, can you tell us a little bit about workaholism?
Well, we'll just clarify. My last name is Cady, for the audience that doesn't know me. Yeah, so last time in our last episode, we talked about that as physicians, we have choices. And I think, during my story, I didn't, despite there's so many details in our stories that we discussed, there's one thing that was related to this workaholism that I didn't bring up in my story. And when I finished my training, when I finished literally my anesthesia residency and going into my pain fellowship, I had a piece of paper in a spiral that I wrote down my goals. And the reason I think that I felt this need to put them on paper is I think it wasn't something I thought about in thoughts per se, that I was a workaholic, but I was coming out of an unhealthy marriage, and I felt like was coming out of a very unhealthy training when it comes to the number of hours and the lack of focus on self-care. And so I just wanted to kind of regroup myself into what's really important. And one of the things, when you're a resident, you're making, nowadays it's different, but from the years that I was there, it was anywhere 30 to 50 grand a year. And so you're used to making, peanuts compared to what a lot of, physicians that are full-time out there are making. So the thinking I had was, I just want to make more money than I'm making right now. And if I can make this amount of money, whatever's required to make that, that's as much as I'm working. So I wrote down, I guess I should just say it, 10 grand. That was my goal. I wanted to make 10 grand a month. And that's all that mattered to me, because I made a choice to live in a 600 square foot apartment, to the extent that I didn't watch much television. So I just had a little TV that my parents had given me, and I hooked it up to the window screw, for the frame, so I could get the one channel like an antenna. I mean, I had just finished my residency and pain fellowship, and I get a 600 square foot apartment because it wasn't very expensive, and I didn't even pay for TV. So I made a choice to decrease the amount of overhead, so to speak, of living. And I was going to work 2 or 3 days a week doing anesthesia. I didn't have any plans to be full-time. I mean, really, there was no intention. I think that was a surprise to many of my colleagues, kind of like the normal thing to do is to work 5 days a week. And to me, I thought, well, I don't have to. Why should I? Because my goal is this, so I have time to do other things, which I would love to just, travel. And, why do I have to work all the time? I still can work with frequency, but not with the same kind of grind that I was doing for so long. I mean, throughout my residency would use my vacations to work overtime. That part of probably my unhealthy marriage and having to pay off debts and all these other things. So I knew what it was like to work nonstop, not just in what was required 80 to 120 hours a week, because that's kind of what was going on with some of before they did the 80-hour work week requirement. So I had this propensity and tendency to work a lot. And I knew that about myself. And so I was trying to create these boundaries and setting these limitations so I wouldn't slip into that tendency again. So the problem is that several years down the road, I end up taking a slightly higher pay, buy a house, and I started slipping into this higher overhead of living. And so then I felt some golden handcuffs going on. So this is where the resurgence of the workaholism, I think, comes in. My husband obviously witnesses this. It's not good for a marriage if you want to make it a priority. I don't have children, but there's still, you need quality time. And if all you do and all you've done is think about work, and you have to look deeper, of course, it's not just the work, it's what is it that's driving that. And many times it is a need to feel this sense of accomplishment, for maybe because of a sense of that's what proves I'm good enough. I don't think that I'm driven by money. I think I'm driven by a lot of times the things that just feel good to me. And a lot of times work does make me feel good. So it's kind of a double-edged sword where you like working sometimes for the sake of working and doing things. But the problem is when you try to just slow down and have quality time, you feel this sense of urgency or need to do something, and it's not healthy. So, I'm just kind of putting myself out there because I think I'm not the only one. And there's a conscious effort I have to make, which for me is I need to be, in my personal opinion, part-time in order for me to tend to the other things in my life that are important, such as my husband, and also having playtime or free time, whatever you want to call it. And that is not an easy thing for someone like me. It actually, hold on. Obviously, I've been talking a lot. So it's a little bit of diatribe there, but I think it's really important to understand that this kind of feeds itself. And the more you do it, the more this is like neurologically how you're wiring yourself. And it's really hard to get yourself from that path. So there needs to be a conscious effort. Workaholism, I couldn't even believe this. Like literally, I printed out all these articles, workaholism, are physicians at risk, and all these topics from back even the 1980s and 1990s. And it can be one of the number one reasons for burnout. So we can talk about that on another topic about, burnout or moral injury and all these other words that we use. But it's very clear this is a problem, especially for those in academia. There's just certain positions that there is a sense that they need to do it all themselves. In fact, there was some questions I thought were quite relevant that maybe the listeners would find that they relate to. But and this was based off of a 2014 study. It was 444 responding physicians and slightly more females than males, but it says, I prefer to do most things myself rather than ask for help. That was 71% of the respondents. Also, I seem to be in a hurry and racing against the clock, 71%. I stay busy and keep many irons in the fire, 75%. It is important that I see the concrete results of what I do, 87%. But there's like 25 questions that was in this article, Workaholism, or Physicians at Risk. And I think it just really goes to show that there's a sense of control, but also a sense of validation, or it doesn't prove the causes, but it does give you a sense that it's important that they see the results of their work and be in charge of that whole process. Anyway, I'll let you have some thoughts on what I was ranting about, Dr. Cuccaro.
Well, you covered quite a bit of stuff in there, right?
Yeah, I did.
So first is that you notice that you're aware of your tendencies to be a workaholic, and you're like so much faster than me. Like, like you're doing this during residency. All I'm trying to just do is get through it, right? And outside of this, and outside of this particular podcast, when it came to pain and stuff, you're like, took me years. You like do it just before while you're in fellowship, but you had a level of awareness to see that this was a danger for you and the impact that it had, right? And so you made a conscious choice, which we talked about, making those conscious choices into defining what the life was that you wanted, and then guarding against it. And that's one of those key things is if you are not aware,
Yeah.
right, if you're not, I think that's part of the danger about being a physician and you getting these busy practices is you don't have time to pause, or I shouldn't say that. We aren't giving ourselves the time to pause. We're not choosing to take the time to pause. And without that pause, you can't become aware. And if
Yeah.
you're not aware, then we fall into default behaviors and automatic behaviors. And that just kind of becomes a self-sustaining path, right? So you were aware enough that you actually stopped that. And again, you covered a whole bunch, but one of the things that you really, really early on, what I wanted to kind of touch on here was this idea that you made this choice that you were going to work part-time so that you can have the life that you wanted to, because the life that you have in this moment in time is important to you, not the life 50 years from now, but the life that you're living at this moment is important. And the first thing I thought of when I heard you say that is, again, this comes back to this idea that people feel trapped and that they have to, they're thinking that workaholism is a good thing because they're doing this. I'm going to save all this money up, and then in 20 years I'm going to retire with X number of dollars or whatever. Well, what happens if there's a stock market crash? What happens if the economy goes crazy? What if some other horrible event like COVID-25 occurs, right? And then everything gets wiped out and we're a post-apocalyptic Mad Max road warrior world, right? Now you've spent all that time doing that. And from a physician standpoint, I always am like in place, well, what if people were more conscious about designing the practices or lives they want earlier on, so that the focus is not on retiring, the whole retire early thing. Instead is to have a meaningful life.
Yep.
And so people can practice until they're 75. Like if you enjoy helping people and helping them get better and you figure out ways to do that and it provides meaning to you, then why would you want to stop if you're enjoying it, right?
Exactly.
If your life is balanced or whatever. So maybe it would make more sense. Maybe, the financial analyst may tell you not to, but it makes more sense to, I'm going to choose to go part-time. I'm going to find a practice where I have more time to do outside endeavors, with the recognition that if I'm enjoying my practice and I have a life that fits me well, I can do this for longer and I'll be happy doing it. And from a safety standpoint, it makes a lot of sense because you as a producer are much more resilient in the face of economic catastrophes than some passive investment out there, like a stock that you don't control or a building that can burn down or anything else like that. So it's like preserve that super, super key aspect. And anyway, so I just applaud you on that level of awareness about workaholism, and then recognizing that if you are aware, you can make conscious choices that actually make more sense long-term than some of the things that people tell you don't. Like you're supposed to make it your key income producing years are between the ages of 40 and 55. And so you should optimize your revenue production. And like, well, if you kill yourself during that time period, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, two comments. One is I had so much denial for so many years in the life I was living, on top of being forced to, and I mean that from a relationship standpoint, and then also having the strain and stress of for so many years of training, because I had, like I mentioned, I did 2 internships. So I had 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, two internships, 3 years of anesthesia, and 1 year of a pain fellowship. And, a glutton for punishment is kind of what it seemed like at the time. So that on top of just unhealthy stuff out in my personal life. And I think the awareness erupted from the fact that suddenly I took off this mask or these blinders that I did merely for probably just survival. And that was just what it took. I compartmentalized. I just pretty much was in denial and didn't want to face the feelings and what I really needed to do with my life. And I think the moment I had a situation to allow me to step away from my personal relationship, I literally took the blinders off completely. And it was, I wouldn't say it was easy, because I was trying to use my pain fellowship in a way that seemed to make sense, but nothing was laying out there for me in the way that seemed right for me. So I didn't choose any of it. And the other thing is, because I wanted to have my freedom in so many ways, personally, professionally, I was recognizing, and just even recently, I come across older patients that have been maybe retired 5 years or whatnot. And like you said, they suddenly went from having something to do every day and being around people and relationships, and then it just like they jumped off a cliff. Like they suddenly have none of that because they didn't plan their retirement. And so I've found it just intriguing to hear and see the impact on people's lives where they just see retirement as a gift given to them, when I think no one is going to care about your retirement more than you, and the government is never going to provide the lifestyle that you probably would love to have. There's going to be some money, but you can't, we don't get into politics, I'm not into that, but there's no way I'm going to depend on a third party to create the life I want. And so the way I always see it, and this is my personal belief, is that I don't ever plan on retiring. Like you said, if you want meaning in your life, you've got to either, you have to create the relationships that go past that retirement age, not just your work relationships, or you continue to work in environments, you can do both, whatever, but do something, whether it's volunteering or making money or whatever suits your particular life, and allow that. But I think there's a delusion and blinders that are on with physicians that start out with that idea of, I'm going to kill myself for 15 years so I can get to this end point and just stop doing anything. Right? Not that that's what they're saying, but I think that none of us have control over when our last day is. It's going to happen at some point. And so I guess I looked at it from the standpoint that, I know we're talking about workaholism, but I had to make a conscious decision that I know I don't know when my last day is on this earth. I know I want to make at least this much money. Sounded good. It wasn't too much. It was reasonable. And I'm going to create that life and that structure that fits within that so that I can still have that extra time to do other things or create other hobbies or spend time with relationships. Because the system is not going to care for you in your personal relationship. Now, other people that you work with might, but it's driven by a much stronger, bigger, complicated system. So you have to create those boundaries. And that even means, I just got an email yesterday about trying to be on a committee. And I just said, you know what? I'm reevaluating my commitments in life. That's what I said. I said, is there a deadline for this? I'm not sure if I'm willing to take it, but I'm curious if there's a deadline. And that person got it. Like, I understand the commitment thing. So it's not always easy to say no when you're a yes person and you're may tend to be a pleaser and you want to achieve and you want to feel good about what you're doing in life and not necessarily being. So those are my 2 cents on workaholism.
No, I think that makes sense. And you kind of bring this episode to a close. I think what the other danger, and kind of pulling it back to the workaholism and tunnel vision, is the more that you've been sort of in this place where you're working, again, unless you pause and give some level of awareness, the more likely you are just to continue that kind of slip into it. And then you have external motivators that are saying it. So you have physicians, you're working through medical school. Some people were working to get into medical school. So that it's even before that. Some of the crazy people are working in high school to get into the college so that then they work. And, so you're blinders, tunnel vision. You go into residency, the same thing, depending on the type of residency you were in and the environment residency it's supposed to be a challenging environment, and you're again working. And then you get off. And unless you take a chance to actually lift up, take a deep breath, get a little level of awareness when, seeing where the water that you're drowning in is, you have a tendency to fall back into that same habit. And it becomes worse now because then, as we talked about before, as the golden handcuffs come in. So again, I just love hearing your stories because you're like, you did all this stuff so much earlier.
Well, I will say too, anyone that's work addicted and you're trying to change, the people around you tend to be work addicted. If they're work addicted and they think that you're less than because they think their ego thinks they're better with that work addiction, be prepared for that, and that's okay.
It is okay. And that becomes that external validation thing. But
Yeah.
Anyway, did I start this episode?
You did, so I'm going to close you out.
You should close this episode out.
Well, thank you for joining us today and talking about work addiction and the fact that you do have choices, like, in the last episode. We are, a lot of us are hard workers, but if it is taking control of your life, remember you do have a choice to enjoy other things in life and design that life for yourself. So I am Melissa Cady with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And if you have any comments or suggestions, feel free to leave below. And you can also sign up to follow us at thechangephysician.com. Take care.
Take care, folks.